We also are very pleased to welcome the Reverend Amy Russell. She's our guest minister this morning. And Reverend Amy Russell is the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Community Church in Glen Allen, so our neighbor just down the road, right outside of Richmond. She's been settled there the past 6 years, and before that, she served churches in Maryland and Ohio. And her sermon topic this week, this morning, is Searching for Our Better Angels. Some of you may recognize the reference to that. And it's chosen to speak to this unusual time in which we find ourselves on this Independence Day. Reverend Amy?
Good morning, everyone. I am really glad to be joining you for worship this morning. I have visited your church so many times over the years and love your sanctuary and your building. And so it's really good to be here with you, maybe not in person, but virtually. So good morning.
Thank you, and we are very pleased to be able to host you, Reverend Amy. And now I will say the words of the chalice lighting, which comes to us from Paul Robeson. I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. And now Linda is going to light my chalice. And if you have a chalice in your home, please light it now. We actually have 3 readings today, and I'm going to first read some words from Frederick Douglass. What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
Our second reading is an excerpt from the Langston Hughes poem written in 1936, Let America Be America Again. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Who said the free? Not me, surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed, for all the songs we've sung, for all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay, except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath. America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we, the people, must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
And our last reading, a quote from Abraham Lincoln from his first inaugural address. 7 southern states had just declared their intention to secede from the Union, and Lincoln was attempting to call them back. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature.
Have you grown up believing in the American ideal? Have you grown up believing that our country was a place where we lived by the principles of equality, freedom, self-determination? The idea of a country where the common person has the opportunity for a job, a decent education, a safe place to live, and equal protection under the law. Many of us have grown up with these understandings and dreams. But in the past days, months, and even years, we continue to see Black Americans killed as they stand on our streets. And our picture of our nation as a place of justice has just come crashing down on many of us, especially those of us who identify as white Americans. That kind of idyllic America has never been true for people who have identified as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. These people have perhaps been treated as second-class citizens, as Langston Hughes says in his poem, "Let America be America Again." There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. America never was America for me. The America that we often lift up in our Independence Day celebrations is illusory for many in this country. Frederick Douglass speaks about the strange idea that slaves might imagine what this liberty that Americans spouted on the 4th of July might be. How could Black Americans with a history of slavery and centuries of oppression feel the stirrings of pride and freedom on this day? Douglass asked, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all the other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. Douglass's description of the celebrations of independence on the 4th of July might sound a true note to many Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Others might feel that we should enjoy this day when Americans celebrate our nation's independence from another nation that was felt to be our oppressor, Great Britain. So growing up and being taught that our nation was forged out of a struggle between a great colonial power and America, this nation of farmers and laborers, this view obscured another view of our nation, that this nation was built, much of its greatness, on enslaved people and the labor that they gave to us. Most white Americans were not taught that our country, built on the principles of equality and freedom, ignored these foundational values in order to enslave African peoples. John Meacham describes the essence of the American soul in his book, Soul of America, as the belief in the proposition, as Jefferson put it in the Declaration of Independence, that anyone coming from anywhere of any color or creed has free access to what Lincoln called the just and generous and prosperous system which opens the way for all. Even Frederick Douglass, who had lived much of his life as a slave, wanted to believe that we could create a better America. He said, "I know of no soil better adapted to the growth of reform than American soil." He believed that the opportunity of greatness lay in the foundations of this country. He believed we could be better. Perhaps it is this story of our nation being founded on the idea of equality for all that leads us to think of ourselves as being a great nation. Perhaps it is that false pride that leads us to the idea of American exceptionalism, that because we strive to be something better, that somehow we are something better. When we look at Abraham Lincoln, we see embodied a man with the soul of an American, a man who is dedicated to this experiment in democracy and freedom. And yet we also see as well the contradictions of a white American who believed in freedom and yet who didn't see how the country's actions in continuing slavery in the southern states could be ended. So while Lincoln was campaigning for president, he spoke against the idea of slavery, but he did not campaign as an abolitionist. He spoke out against slavery being allowed to extend to the western states, but he did not speak out about abolishing it in the northern and southern states. Lincoln's concept was to free the enslaved and to help them get back to Africa, freeing the country from this problem that it had created. He did not believe that African Americans could live in this country as equals to white Americans. Later, events of the political landscape caught up with him. Lincoln was elected as a Republican candidate, which for the South was the worst outcome since the Republican Party was the more liberal party of the day. 2 weeks before Lincoln's inauguration, the South announced that they were seceding from the Union. The nation was holding its breath to see what is Lincoln going to say in his inaugural address? What is he going to say about slavery and about the Union? Lincoln had no plan to end slavery, but instead he wished to reconcile the South and bring them back into the Union. His speech said so. He said emphatically that he had no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. He believed he had no constitutional grounding to do so. He also upheld the Dred Scott ruling, allowing escaped slaves to be captured in northern states and to be sent back to their owners. At the end of this speech, he called on the nation to come together when he mentioned the chorus of the Union, touched again by our better angels. These are the words that we remember. We all know that Lincoln eventually came to see the error of trying to appease the South as the country broke into bloody and vicious civil war. He came to see that slavery had to be ended, but it took him the length of the war for him to find his better angels. It took him the radical experience of seeing our nation rent into two before he could realize what he needed to do. With his feet of clay, Lincoln demonstrated to history what a person with a good heart but a wrong idea might do, given the impression that was built into our nation. John Meacham goes on to explain that after the war ended, the Civil War continued to be fought in the South, despite the nature of this lost cause. He says that it continues to be fought today by those whose aim is to promote and continue the mantle of white supremacy. That is still the ultimate goal of many people who fear what they think they will lose if white supremacy is no longer the culture of this nation. While Lincoln is remembered as the president who freed enslaved people, he didn't set out to be that. History or fate, or maybe some strange form of that moral arc of the universe that we hear about, which bends towards justice, maybe that changed things. What finally pulled Lincoln to doing the right thing? The political opinion of the Northern voters, his own conscience, or some grace that was visited upon him? We don't know. Is it grace that is being visited upon us again today? Are we being given another chance to find our better angels? Why hasn't this country woken up to the violence and oppression that we visited upon Black citizens again and again? Is this the final clarion call to us to wake up? As the streets are alive with protesters and statues which have been honored and glorified begin to topple, as people who never understood why Black Lives Matter start to have a glimmer of understanding, what do we do now? How do we find our better angels? So Lincoln is often mentioned as having feet of clay, that phrase. So I looked up that phrase, and the metaphor comes from the biblical story of the book of Daniel. And in that story, it talks about King Nebuchadnezzar, who had a dream about a statue represented Babylon, the king's country. Statue was a man whose upper body was made of gold, and it was strong and bold. And then his lower body was made of iron, still strong. But the statue's feet were half clay and half iron. So they're both weak and strong, which indicated that he was divided as the country of Babylon was divided. For me, the past years have been a roller coaster in my own learning. Let us say that at times I have had feet of clay, and I was only looking at what was convenient and acceptable in terms of what I wanted to do with my life to change what I believed about race and the issues of race. Taken me many years before I begun to find my better angels. As our Unitarian Universalist movement awoke to the battle for anti-racism, I was on board for many of the goals of dismantling white supremacy. I was okay with using that term because I understood that we were describing institutional racism with the term white supremacy, not necessarily humans as racists. But there have been many times when I have felt estranged from this faith tradition as it began to center this issue. In my discomfort with the primacy of the issue, I began to feel like I lost my home. When I went to the 2017 GA in New Orleans, I could not understand why our association was being torn apart by these issues of race. It felt like we were experiencing like this earthquake that was shaking us to the very core. But I didn't have a lot of understanding of why this was happening. I felt that I had found a refuge in a faith as a person with a deep commitment in justice, and I was now being thrown out of that faith because I wasn't woke enough. I felt that I was being shamed and blamed for being white. And I felt our faith was being taken over by people who could only see color. Despite my alienation from what was going on, I was also beginning to be swayed by what I saw. So I began to understand that people of color in our association had been alienated from our faith tradition for years. They had been treated as less than, and that began to slowly eat away at my understanding. So I started to do the work. I took a plunge and I participated in a year-long racial justice workshop that was being held here in an interfaith center in Richmond. And I attended the Richmond Pledge, which was offered both by First UU of Richmond and my own congregation, UUCC. And I began to feel things changing within me. But what really changed me was when I became a member of a clergy group, which was a part of our Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. I had signed on to be a member of the collegiality development team. The other teams we were working with were working on education for ministers and anti-racism and anti-oppression for ministers. And our three teams met together. So I started hearing stories from our clergy friends that began to change what I felt. They told of being kept out of the decision-making and out of leadership. They told of not feeling like they had a home here. They said that our association doing the work was finally allowing Black and brown members to feel like they had a home here. So one of these colleagues sat down with me and he asked me to tell him my story of how I had felt. And I told my story about how I had felt like I didn't have a home in the UU world anymore, how I'd felt shamed and blamed. And he gently took my hand and he said, now you know just a little of how the people of color have felt in this movement for years. And he asked me if I wanted to be a part of this new awakening. And I finally could honestly say yes at that point. So I realized that I had been centering myself and my whiteness and holding on to white supremacy in a way that I didn't understand. And I began to recognize that I did not have to hide my feelings of shame, that I could begin to share them with others. Now I could take the feelings I had and commit myself to doing the work, that I could begin to dedicate myself to finding my better angels. And even though this work will take the rest of my life. Now, I know that this is work that's difficult and different for every single person. And maybe you've had some similar feelings over the years. Maybe the past few weeks have been your awakening. And if so, I invite you into embracing this work. We are all invited into this work, even if we sometimes have feet of clay. So attending the General Assembly this past week was an amazing experience as we were able to hear from so many Indigenous people, Black and people of color in our movement. And we were also able to hear from the Commission on Institutional Change, which had been committed in 2017 to examine our association and the evidence of an internal system of racism. So their report, which is called Widening the Circle of Concern, is now available in the UUA bookstore. And I encourage you all to read it because it gives a lot of takeaways and recommendations for our faith. Many congregations are also considering adopting the 8th principle. So this is the principle that asks congregations to commit to work to dismantle racism and build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. There is much examination needed to enter into that kind of a commitment. It's not done lightly. So the work of finding our better angels, it's a lifetime commitment. It isn't just the issue of the day. It's the issue we must commit to now to ensure that we can be proud of being a Unitarian Universalist. As Americans, dismantling white supremacy is what we must do to realize our own dreams of an America finally enacting that ideal of equality and equity. Let America be America one day. Let us pause to consider what is in our hearts this morning as we pray. Spirit of life and love, God of our better angels, we send our love and our hope to all those who are ill and who have family who are ill. We hold in our hearts our community, which is hurting, the people on our streets, the people waiting to hear the outcome of all of their protesting and what the results will be. We pray for this community to find healing and reconciliation. Let us find within us, even when we feel confused and we're still hurting and we're feeling out of step perhaps with the rest of the world, let us find within us that strength and that courage to find comfort that we are not alone. We're not alone when we're hurting and in fear. We're not alone when we are concerned about what is happening in our nation. And we're not alone when we try to find hope together. Things are changing. Spirit of love, please remind us that we all can find our better angels. Amen. Blessed be.
It has been so good to be together. Please invite others to join us for worship each week, so this time can be a source of hope and strength throughout the world. And people don't have to be here in this community. They can literally be anywhere around the world, family, friends, anyone you think who might be benefiting from the community that we offer and that the caring that we share for each other together. Please listen now to the benediction. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, and honor all persons. Return often to let your cup be refilled. The chalice is extinguished, but the flame of hope, truth, and love goes with us. It is finished in beauty. You may extinguish your chalice too.